It started as a day like any other at the exclusive private jet terminal. The sun filtered through the tall glass windows, casting a golden glow on the polished floors. Outside, the jets lined up neatly, their sleek frames gleaming in the morning light. Inside, the air buzzed with an air of quiet luxury, muted conversations, the clink of coffee cups, and the occasional rustle of newspapers. Pilots gathered in small groups, their uniforms crisp and their badges shining. They exchanged light-hearted banter about their latest flights, the destinations they had visited, and the quirks of their passengers. Travelers lounged in plush leather chairs, scrolling through their phones or glancing at their watches, exuding an air of privilege and impatience. Then she walked in. At first, no one paid much attention. She moved with quiet confidence, her steps deliberate and unhurried. Her outfit was simple yet elegant, a tailored black coat, sleek heels, and a leather handbag slung over her shoulder. But as she made her way toward the counter, heads began to turn. It wasn't admiration that drew their gaze. It was something else. Something less kind. There was an unspoken rule in places like this, a certain kind of exclusivity that hung in the air. To some, her presence seemed out of place. Whispers started in hushed tones. A few eyebrows raised, and subtle glances were exchanged. And then there was the pilot. He stood near the jet, leaning casually against its shining fuselage. His uniform was spotless, his cap tilted just enough to suggest authority without formality. He had been chatting with another pilot, a broad grin on his face, but when he saw her, his demeanor shifted. "You sure you're in the right place?" he called out, loud enough for others to hear. His voice carried a mocking edge, and his grin widened as if he had said something clever. A couple of crew members nearby chuckled nervously, unsure whether to join in or stay silent. The woman paused mid-step. She turned her head slowly toward the source of the voice, her expression unreadable. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied him with a calm, steady gaze, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. There was no anger, no indignation, just an eerie sense of control. Then, she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that welcomed conversation. It was the kind of smile that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. The pilot raised an eyebrow, but his smirk faltered slightly. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but her reaction wasn't it. Still, he wasn't finished. "I mean," he added, trying to recapture the confidence he thought he had, "this isn't exactly coach class. You might have taken a wrong turn." A few people nearby chuckled again, this time with a bit more boldness. The sound of their laughter seemed to fuel him. The woman tilted her head slightly, her smile unwavering. Then, without a word, she turned back toward the counter and continued walking. The pilot watched her go, his grin returning. To him, it was a victory, a small, petty triumph. He turned back to his colleague, muttering something under his breath that earned another round of chuckles. But not everyone was laughing. A flight attendant standing near the counter glanced nervously between the pilot and the woman. She bit her lip, as if debating whether to say something, but ultimately remained silent. Another passenger, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, frowned slightly as he watched the exchange, though he quickly looked away when the woman approached the counter. She handed her identification to the staff member behind the desk, her movements deliberate and precise. The staff member, a young man with a polite but slightly wary expression, took her ID and began typing into the computer. The woman's demeanor remained calm, almost indifferent, but there was something about her presence that seemed to command attention. Even as the pilot and his colleagues continued their conversation, their laughter fading into the background, more eyes began to drift toward her. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "No idea," came the reply. "She doesn't look like a regular, though." The whispers grew louder, curiosity mixing with skepticism. Some watched with mild interest, others with open doubt. It wasn't just the pilot who had judged her on sight, it was the room. And yet, the woman didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she gave no indication. The staff member behind the counter handed back her ID with a polite nod. "Your jet is ready, ma'am," he said, his voice steady but noticeably more respectful than before. She thanked him with a slight nod and turned toward the jet. The pilot, who had been watching the entire interaction out of the corner of his eye, straightened up. His grin returned, though it was more subdued now. He stepped forward, positioning himself in her path as if by accident. "Let me guess," he said, his tone dripping with faux charm. "You're flying as a guest today? Friend of the owner, maybe?" The woman stopped again, her gaze meeting his. This time, her smile was gone. She didn't say anything, but the weight of her silence seemed to press down on him. A few seconds passed, though it felt like much longer. Then, without a word, she stepped around him and continued toward the jet. The pilot watched her go, his smirk fading once more. For a brief moment, he looked uncertain, as if sensing that something wasn't quite right. But he quickly shook it off, turning back to his colleague with a shrug. "Some people really don't belong here," he muttered. The woman, now at the base of the jet stairs, paused again. She glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes locking with his for the final time. What no one realized, not the pilot, not the passengers, not even the staff, was that this wasn't just any woman. And today wasn't going to end the way anyone expected. The woman ascended the steps of the private jet with a grace that defied the casual arrogance she had just encountered. Her steps were steady, each one measured, as if she was walking toward a destiny only she understood. The cabin doors closed behind her, shutting out the whispers and laughter from the terminal, but the tension she had left behind was far from over. Inside the terminal, the pilot stood rooted in place, his arms crossed over his chest. He tried to shake off the unsettling sense that her silence carried more weight than words ever could. His colleague nudged him with an elbow, smirking. "Man, you've got to give her credit," the other pilot said with a chuckle. "She didn't even flinch." The pilot shrugged, his confidence quickly returning. "They never do at first. It's always the same. Some people think they can waltz into places like this just because they've got a little extra in their wallet. Doesn't mean they belong." He said it loud enough for the lingering passengers and staff to hear, earning a few nods and scattered murmurs of agreement. The staff at the counter exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to contradict him. After all, he was the pilot, the one who commanded the skies, or so he thought. But while he basked in his imagined superiority, a quiet ripple of curiosity began to spread among the onlookers. "Who do you think she is?" whispered a woman clutching a designer handbag, her gaze fixed on the jet now taxiing to the runway. "No clue," her companion replied, adjusting his tie. "But she's got to be someone important to fly on one of those." "She didn't act like a guest," the woman mused. "Too calm. Too in control." Their conversation trailed off, but the seed of intrigue had been planted. As the jet disappeared from view, the terminal returned to its usual hum of activity, though an undercurrent of speculation lingered. Underscore 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 on. Inside the jet, the atmosphere was entirely different. The woman settled into a plush leather seat, her posture relaxed but poised. She glanced out the window, her expression serene, as if the world beyond the glass held no power over her. A flight attendant approached with a tray of refreshments, her professionalism unwavering despite the subtle tension that seemed to fill the cabin. "May I offer you something to drink, ma'am?" The woman turned her attention to the attendant and offered a faint smile. "Just water, thank you." The attendant nodded, retreating to fulfill the request. But as she moved through the cabin, she couldn't help but steal glances at the passenger. There was something about her, an air of quiet authority that felt out of place yet entirely fitting at the same time. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the pilot was oblivious to the shift in dynamics. He adjusted his headset and ran through the pre-flight checks, his earlier bravado now replaced with the focus of his profession. "Everything set up front?" the co-pilot asked, glancing at him. "Yeah," the pilot replied, his tone casual. "Though I'll admit, I'm curious about our mystery passenger. Bet you she's some influencer or a lottery winner. You know the type, new money, no idea how to act in places like this." The co-pilot raised an eyebrow but said nothing, returning his attention to the controls. As the jet soared into the sky, the woman remained still, her hands resting lightly on the armrests. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as if preparing herself. Then, she reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek tablet. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, typing out messages and reviewing documents with an efficiency that hinted at a sharp mind and a busy schedule. Her demeanor was calm, but her actions carried purpose. This wasn't just a flight, it was the beginning of something much larger. Underscore 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 on. Back at the terminal, the whispers continued to spread. "She didn't have an entourage," someone pointed out. "Don't people like her usually travel with assistants or bodyguards?" "Maybe she's trying to keep a low profile," another suggested. "Low profile? Did you see how she handled that pilot? If looks could kill." The speculation ranged from wild guesses to far-fetched theories, but no one could deny the sense of mystery surrounding the woman. And while the pilot might have dismissed her as just another out-of-place passenger, others weren't so sure. One of the terminal staff, a young man who had been manning the counter during the encounter, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He replayed the scene in his mind, remembering the way she had stood her ground without saying a word, the way her silence had carried more weight than the pilot's taunts ever could. "I think she's someone important," he murmured to himself, his curiosity growing. His colleague overheard and shot him a skeptical look. "Important? She didn't look like a CEO or anything. Probably just some lucky nobody who saved up for a one-time trip." But the young man wasn't convinced. Something about her had felt different. Underscore 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 on. On board the jet, the woman finished her work and placed the tablet back in her bag. She leaned back in her seat, her gaze drifting to the clouds outside. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, her expression softening. But then, as if reminded of something, she straightened. Her hand reached for her phone, and she dialed a number with practiced ease. "It's me," she said, her tone low but firm. "Yes, everything's in place. I'll handle the next steps personally. Make sure the documents are ready when we land." She ended the call and placed the phone on the table in front of her, her fingers tapping lightly against the surface. Her eyes were focused, her mind clearly at work on something far beyond the confines of the jet. Underscore 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 on. Back in the cockpit, the pilot glanced at the passenger manifest, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. "Hey," he said, nudging the co-pilot. "Take a look at this. Name's not ringing any bells for me." "You?" The co-pilot shook his head. "Doesn't mean much. Could be anyone." "Yeah, but something about her doesn't sit right," the pilot muttered. "She's too calm." Like she's got something up her sleeve. The co-pilot gave him a sidelong glance. Maybe she's just minding her business, unlike you. The pilot chuckled, though the comment stung more than he let on. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, that the woman's silence and composure weren't just happenstance. But for now, he pushed the thought aside. After all, he was the one in control, wasn't he? Underscore 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 on. The stage was set. The pieces were moving. And as the jet cruised through the skies, one thing was certain: the day that had started so ordinarily was about to take a turn that no one, least of all the smug pilot, could have predicted. The pilot's laughter echoed through the exclusive terminal, cutting through the low murmur of conversations and the soft hum of luxury. His tone was sharp and mocking, each word laced with a condescension that made a few heads turn in curiosity, though most quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. "Must be a first-timer," he said loudly, crossing his arms as he leaned back against the gleaming fuselage of the jet. His words hung in the air, meant to linger and sting. "You can always tell. They've got that look, like they're playing dress-up for a day." His colleagues snickered behind him, their laughter quiet but complicit. One of them, a younger co-pilot who seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up, shuffled awkwardly, casting a glance at the woman before quickly looking away. The woman stood a few paces away, her back straight and her expression calm. She wasn't oblivious to the murmurs and sideways glances. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing against her like an invisible force. But if it bothered her, she didn't show it. Her eyes briefly scanned the room, taking in the faces around her. Most people avoided her gaze, pretending to be engrossed in their phones or conversations. A few watched her openly, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She adjusted the strap of her handbag and walked toward the check-in desk. Her steps were measured, her posture unyielding. Every movement radiated a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with the assumptions being made about her. The whispers started as soon as she passed. "Who do you think she is?" a woman in a tailored suit murmured to her companion. "No idea," came the hushed reply. "But she doesn't look like she belongs here. Maybe she's lost. Or trying too hard," another voice chimed in, accompanied by a faint chuckle. The woman didn't acknowledge the voices. She kept her focus on the desk ahead, her calm demeanor betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside her. Behind her, the pilot wasn't done. "Wannabe high flyers," he said to no one in particular, his voice dripping with disdain. "You'd think they'd know their limits. This isn't a bus station." His colleagues chuckled again, though one of them cast a wary glance toward the woman. "You think she heard you?" The pilot shrugged, unbothered. "Doesn't matter. People like her, they never last long in places like this." The woman reached the check-in desk and handed over her ID with a steady hand. The young man behind the counter glanced at the card, his professionalism faltering for a brief moment as he read the name. He quickly recovered, his voice polite but tinged with a slight nervousness. "Welcome, ma'am," he said, avoiding her gaze as he typed her details into the system. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm but firm. As the check-in process continued, the pilot's gaze lingered on her. He leaned closer to his colleagues, muttering something under his breath that made them stifle their laughter. "Bet she's one of those influencers," he said with a smirk. "Always chasing after the next viral moment. Probably here for a photo op." The others chuckled quietly, though their laughter was starting to feel forced. There was something about the woman's composure that was unsettling, even to those who had joined in the mockery. The young man at the desk completed the check-in and handed back her ID with a small, respectful nod. "Your jet is ready, ma'am," he said, his tone more measured now. The woman thanked him and turned toward the waiting jet. As she walked away, she felt the weight of the pilot's gaze on her back, but she didn't look back. Underscore 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 on. Back at the desk, the pilot's smirk widened. "You see that," he said, gesturing toward her retreating figure. "Didn't even blink. They never do at first. Think they can walk in here and blend in, like no one will notice." One of his colleagues hesitated before responding, glancing nervously at the woman as she climbed the steps to the jet. "Maybe she's just confident," he suggested tentatively. The pilot scoffed. "Confident? Please. She's out of her depth, and she knows it. You watch, she'll be posting pictures all over social media about her first private jet experience by the end of the day." The others chuckled again, though the unease in their laughter was growing. Underscore 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 on. Inside the jet, the woman settled into her seat, her movements graceful and deliberate. The cabin was silent, the kind of silence that spoke of luxury and exclusivity. The plush leather seats, the ambient lighting, the faint hum of the engines, it was a world designed to make its occupants feel untouchable. But for the woman, it was just another space, another step in her journey. She adjusted her seat belt and took a moment to glance out the window. Her expression remained calm, but her mind was far from still. She could still hear the pilot's laughter, his words echoing in her memory. The condescension, the arrogance, the blatant dismissal, it wasn't new to her. She had encountered it before, in different places and different forms. But this time, it felt different. This time, she wasn't just enduring it. She was preparing. Her phone buzzed softly in her handbag. She retrieved it and glanced at the screen, her eyes scanning the message briefly before she replied with a few quick taps. "It's done," she typed, her fingers moving with precision. "Proceed as planned." She sent the message and placed the phone on the small table in front of her. Then, she leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. The jet began to taxi toward the runway, the engines roaring to life. As it lifted off the ground, leaving the terminal and its whispers behind, the woman felt a sense of clarity settle over her. This wasn't just a flight. It was a turning point. And the people who had judged her, who had laughed at her, were about to learn a lesson they wouldn't forget. Underscore 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 on. Back at the terminal, the pilot watched the jet disappear into the sky, a smug grin still plastered on his face. He turned to his colleagues, his tone light and mocking. "Let's see how long she lasts," he said with a chuckle. But even as he laughed, a small part of him couldn't shake the image of her calm, unwavering gaze. It lingered in his mind, a quiet reminder that not everything was as it seemed. And while he didn't know it yet, the events of that day were far from over. The storm he had so casually dismissed was just beginning to form. The jet ascended smoothly into the sky, its engines roaring with power as the runway faded into the distance. Inside, the woman sat silently, her posture as composed as ever. The view from the window was stunning, clouds brushing against the jet as it soared higher. Yet her thoughts weren't on the view. Her focus remained on the events that had just unfolded and the ones that were about to follow. She reached for her phone again, glancing at a notification that had just appeared. The message was concise, all arrangements finalized. Awaiting further instructions. A faint smile crossed her lips as she typed a brief reply, "Perfect timing. Execute as planned." She set the phone down and leaned back into her seat, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a spark in her eyes, a glimmer of something deliberate and unstoppable. The pilot leaned against the counter, still reveling in his earlier performance. His smug demeanor hadn't waned, if anything, it had grown more pronounced. "You see the way she strutted in here," he said to his colleagues, his tone loud enough for others in the room to hear. "Like she owned the place." He laughed, shaking his head. "Probably already posting selfies with a caption like, 'Living my best life.'" One of the younger pilots shifted uncomfortably, glancing around to see if anyone else shared his unease. "Maybe she's just confident," he murmured, echoing his earlier hesitation. The lead pilot scoffed. "Confident? Please. Confidence isn't walking into a private terminal looking like you just wandered out of a high-street boutique." His laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Mark my words, she's trying to play in a league she doesn't belong to." A woman seated nearby, dressed in a sleek black pantsuit, raised an eyebrow at the pilot's remarks. She had been quietly observing the exchange, her expression neutral but her interest clearly piqued. "Funny," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. "You seem awfully invested in someone you claim doesn't belong here." The pilot turned, his smirk faltering slightly at the unexpected challenge. "Just calling it like I see it," he replied with forced nonchalance. "Maybe you should try seeing a little deeper," she said, her tone cool but pointed. She stood, collecting her things and walking away without waiting for a response. The pilot watched her go, irritation flickering across his face. "People these days," he muttered under his breath. But as he turned back to his colleagues, his bravado began to waver. Something about the exchange and the woman's quiet confidence left him unsettled. The jet cruised steadily at altitude, the hum of the engines a constant backdrop to the quiet luxury of the cabin. The woman remained composed, but her mind was anything but still. Her thoughts drifted to the countless times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or mocked for daring to step into spaces where others believed she didn't belong. This wasn't the first time she had faced such arrogance, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But today, she had the power to rewrite the narrative. She opened her laptop, the sleek device springing to life with a soft glow. A few quick keystrokes brought up a series of documents and emails, each meticulously organized. One email in particular caught her attention, a message from her legal team confirming the finalization of a deal she had spent months negotiating. She scanned the contents, her smile widening slightly. Everything was falling into place. Her phone buzzed again, another message appearing on the screen: "All personnel have been briefed. Awaiting your arrival." She replied with two simple words: "On schedule." As she closed her laptop, a sense of calm determination settled over her. The pieces were in motion, and there was no turning back now. Back at the terminal, whispers were spreading. The woman's brief but impactful presence had left a ripple effect, stirring curiosity and speculation among the staff and passengers. "Did you see the way she handled herself?" a flight attendant said to her colleague, glancing toward the now empty check-in desk. "Yeah," the other replied. "She didn't even flinch when the captain made those remarks. Just walked right past him like he didn't matter." "Maybe he doesn't," the first attendant said with a sly smile. The pilot, still leaning against the counter, caught snippets of the conversation and frowned. His earlier smugness was beginning to sour into irritation. He didn't like the idea of being an afterthought in anyone's story, especially not hers. "Why's everyone so hung up on her?" he muttered to himself, though his voice was loud enough for those nearby to hear. "She's just another passenger." But deep down, a nagging doubt began to creep in. What if she wasn't? The first signs of trouble appeared shortly after the pilot returned to the lounge. His phone buzzed with an urgent notification, the screen lighting up with a message from the operations team. "Need you in the briefing room immediately. Situation requires your attention." He frowned, annoyance flickering across his face. "What now?" he muttered, rising from his seat. The briefing room was abuzz with activity when he arrived, the air thick with tension. Senior staff members were huddled around a table, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright panic. "What's going on?" the pilot demanded, his tone brusque. One of the managers turned to him, her face pale. "There's been a development," she said carefully, gesturing to a document on the table. The pilot scanned the document, his eyes widening as he read the bold headline, "Ownership transfer effective immediately." "What is this?" he asked, his voice rising. The manager hesitated, then replied, "The jet you were assigned to it's just been sold. And the new owner is already en route to finalize the transition." The pilot's heart sank as the realization hit him. He didn't need to ask who the new owner was. Deep down, he already knew. Moments later, she ascended the short staircase into the jet. The luxurious interior gleamed under soft lighting, a perfect blend of comfort and extravagance. She moved with poise, her steps deliberate, her calm demeanor unshaken despite the earlier encounter. The pilot stood nearby, still wearing his mask of smug superiority. His smile was polite, but his eyes betrayed his condescension. "Welcome aboard," he said, his tone laced with artificial charm. "I hope this flight meets your expectations." She met his gaze briefly, offering a curt nod. "Thank you," she replied, her voice cool and steady. Without further acknowledgement, she settled into her seat near the window. The cabin crew, standing off to the side, exchanged nervous glances. They had seen the pilot's behavior earlier but had remained silent. Now, they sensed an air of quiet authority emanating from the woman, though they couldn't quite place why. As the plane taxied down the runway, the pilot's needling remarks continued, veiled under the guise of professionalism. "First time on a private jet?" he asked with a smirk. "Don't worry, it's a bit overwhelming at first. But I'm sure you'll adjust." She glanced up from her phone, her expression calm. "I'm sure I will," she replied, her words carrying a subtle weight that made him hesitate for just a moment before turning away. The crew avoided eye contact, focusing on their tasks. They could feel the tension in the air, an invisible line being drawn that none of them wanted to cross. As the jet climbed to cruising altitude, she remained quiet, her gaze shifting between the cabin's features and the crew's movements. She watched the pilot, too, noting the way he carried himself, the way he spoke to his colleagues, the subtle yet unmistakable arrogance in his demeanor. Her observations weren't casual, they were calculated. She was taking everything in, every detail, every nuance. The pilot, oblivious to her scrutiny, continued to play his part. He made unnecessary announcements over the intercom, his tone just slightly patronizing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, though she was the only passenger on board, "we've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." His voice lingered on the word enjoy, as if mocking her right to be there. She didn't flinch. Instead, she opened her laptop, her fingers moving deftly across the keyboard. A document appeared on the screen, one she had been carefully crafting for weeks. Her eyes scanned the text, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. An hour into the flight, she made a quiet phone call. The soft hum of the engines masked the sound of her voice, but the crew couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in her demeanor. She leaned back in her seat, her tone low and deliberate. "It's time," she said, pausing briefly to listen. "Yes. Proceed as planned. I'll handle the rest when we land." Her words were calm, but there was an edge to them, a sense of finality that sent a ripple through the cabin. The crew exchanged glances, their unease growing. The pilot, seated in the cockpit, remained unaware of the call. His confidence was unshaken, his arrogance intact. As the flight continued, subtle changes began to unfold. The crew received an unexpected notification on their internal communication system, prompting them to gather briefly in the galley. "Did you see this?" one of them whispered, showing the message on their tablet. The others nodded, their expressions a mix of confusion and apprehension. "What does it mean?" "I don't know," another replied. "But something's definitely going on." They returned to their stations, their movements more cautious, their eyes darting toward the woman who remained seated, serene and composed. The pilot, still in his bubble of self-assuredness, noticed none of it. At one point, the pilot stepped into the cabin, his posture relaxed, his tone casual. "Is everything to your liking?" he asked, addressing her directly. She looked up, meeting his gaze with a measured stare. "Everything is fine," she replied evenly. Her calmness seemed to unnerve him slightly, though he quickly masked it with another forced smile. "Good to hear," he said, retreating to the cockpit. But as he walked away, a nagging sense of unease began to creep in. Something about her composure, her quiet confidence, didn't sit right with him. As the jet began its descent, the atmosphere grew heavier. The crew's movements became more deliberate, their glances more frequent. She closed her laptop and placed it neatly in her bag, her expression unreadable. Her phone buzzed with another notification, which she read with a flicker of satisfaction. The pilot made his final announcement over the intercom, his tone as self-assured as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please prepare for arrival." Her eyes flicked toward the cockpit door, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Oh, I'm ready," she murmured to herself. The jet touched down smoothly, the runway rushing past in a blur. As it taxied to the terminal, the tension in the cabin reached its peak. She gathered her belongings, rising gracefully from her seat. The crew stood by, their expressions a mix of respect and curiosity. The pilot, stepping out of the cockpit, gave her one last glance. "Welcome to your destination," he said, his tone polite but distant. She nodded, her smile serene. "Thank you for the flight," she replied, her words carrying a weight that made him pause. As the jet came to a stop, the cabin door opened, revealing a waiting team on the tarmac. They weren't the standard ground crew. These individuals were dressed sharply, their presence commanding. The pilot's smirk faltered as realization dawned. This wasn't a regular passenger. And this was no ordinary arrival. The cabin door opened fully, and the woman stepped out onto the staircase leading to the tarmac. The team waiting below moved with precision, their actions swift yet respectful. They weren't just there to assist, they were clearly there for her. The pilot followed, lingering at the top of the stairs, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene below. His usual arrogance was now tinged with confusion. The reception she was receiving didn't match his assumptions about her. "Who are they?" he muttered to one of the crew members standing nearby. The crew member shook their head, just as puzzled. "No idea. But they look important." As the woman descended the stairs, one of the men stepped forward, greeting her with a firm handshake and a respectful nod. "Everything is prepared as you instructed," he said. "Good," she replied, her tone calm yet authoritative. The pilot's unease grew as he watched her interact with the team. Their deference to her was undeniable, their actions deliberate and coordinated. It was as if she was the one in charge not just of them, but of everything around her. He descended the stairs slowly, his expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Excuse me," he said, addressing one of the men in the group. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" The man barely glanced at him, his focus remaining on the woman. "You'll find out soon enough," he said curtly. The pilot bristled at the dismissal. "I'm the captain of this flight," he said, his voice firm. "I deserve to know what's happening." The man turned to him fully this time, his gaze steady. "Not for long," he replied simply, before turning back to the woman. The woman stepped onto the tarmac, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She paused, taking a moment to survey her surroundings. The terminal loomed in the background,